After 7 years of paying all the household bills, my daughter-in-law won the lottery and kicked me out. "You have no purpose anymore. Go live in a nursing home." I burst out laughing and said, "You've always been stupid. Did you even read the name on the ticket?" Her world collapsed. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I never thought my own son would stand there silent as a stone while his wife threw me out like yesterday's garbage. But there I was, at 62 years old, watching Chloe wave that lottery ticket in my face like it was a weapon designed specifically to destroy what little dignity I had left. "You have no purpose anymore, Norman," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of cruelty that only comes from someone who's been waiting years to unleash it. "Go live in a nursing home where you belong." The words hit me like a physical blow, but what hurt more was seeing Ronald just standing there behind her, his eyes fixed on the floor, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. My own son couldn't even look at me while his wife dismantled 7 years of my life in a single sentence. I stood in the doorway of what had been my home for the better part of a decade, holding the small suitcase that contained everything I owned. Everything else in that house I had paid for. The mortgage payments, the utilities, the groceries, the repairs, the insurance, even the damn lottery tickets that Chloe bought every week with my money while complaining that I was eating too much of their food. "Chloe," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" She laughed, actually laughed, tilting her head back like I'd just told her the funniest joke she'd ever heard. "Sure, Norman, I just won $57 million. $57 million. Do you understand what that means?" I understood perfectly. It meant she thought she was finally free of the burden of pretending to tolerate me. It meant she could stop the fake smiles and the passive-aggressive comments about how I left my coffee cup in the sink or watched the news too loud. It meant she no longer had to pretend that my presence in their lives was anything other than an inconvenience she'd been forced to endure. "It means," she continued, her voice getting sharper with each word, "that I don't need your social security checks anymore. I don't need you paying our bills. I don't need you shuffling around here, taking up space, eating our food, and making everything smell like old man cologne." Ronald shifted uncomfortably, but still said nothing. 7 years I'd been living in their house, and not once had I heard him defend me against her verbal attacks. Not when she complained about my old man habits to her friends right in front of me. Not when she served me smaller portions at dinner while claiming she was watching my health. Not when she moved my chair further and further from the television until I was practically sitting in the kitchen just to watch the evening news. "The nursing home will be perfect for you," Chloe went on, her eyes bright with a malicious kind of joy. "You can play bingo with people your own age and complain about your aches and pains to someone who actually cares." That's when something inside me shifted. Not anger exactly, not hurt, though God knows there was plenty of that. It was something much more dangerous than either of those emotions. It was amusement. I started to laugh. Quietly at first, just a small chuckle that made Chloe's triumphant expression falter slightly, then louder until I was laughing so hard that tears started streaming down my face. "What's so funny?" she demanded, taking a step back as if my laughter was somehow threatening. "Oh, Chloe," I managed between gasps of laughter, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. "You've always been stupid, but this takes the cake." Her face went bright red, and for the first time in years I saw genuine uncertainty in her eyes. "What did you just call me? Did you even read the name on the ticket?" I asked, still chuckling as I picked up my suitcase. I mean, really read it? Not just the numbers, but the actual name. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. She looked down at the ticket in her hand, and I watched as her eyes moved across the small print. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, that can't be." Ronald finally looked up from the floor, confused and starting to look worried. "What's wrong?" "What's he talking about?" But I was already walking toward my old pickup truck, the same one I'd been driving for 15 years. The one Chloe always complained made their driveway look trashy. I could hear her behind me, frantically turning the ticket over and over, probably seeing my name printed clearly at the bottom for the first time. "Norman!" she screamed, her voice cracking with panic. "Norman, get back here right now!" I loaded my suitcase into the truck bed and climbed into the driver's seat. Through the windshield, I could see her running toward me, the lottery ticket clutched in her fist, her face a mask of desperation and growing horror. Ronald was right behind her, finally moving, finally showing some emotion, but it was too late for that. I rolled down my window as she reached the truck, breathing hard and sweating despite the cool October air. "You can't leave," she gasped, leaning against the door. "This is a mistake. The ticket. It's obviously a mistake. You don't buy lottery tickets. You're too cheap to waste money on that stuff." I smiled at her, the same kind smile I'd been giving her for 7 years while she slowly poisoned my life with her contempt. "You're right about one thing, Chloe. I am careful with money. I always have been." "Then how? How is my name on the ticket you've been claiming as yours?" I finished for her. "Well, that's something you're going to have to figure out, isn't it?" I started the engine, and the old truck rumbled to life. Chloe grabbed the door handle like she was going to try to stop me from leaving. "Where are you going?" she demanded. "To find a nice hotel for the night," I said calmly. "Maybe one with room service. I think I've earned a little luxury, don't you?" As I pulled out of the driveway, I could see both of them in my rearview mirror. Chloe was standing in the middle of the street, still holding that ticket, looking like someone had just told her the world was ending. Ronald was beside her, his mouth moving frantically as he probably demanded explanations she couldn't give. 7 years of humiliation, 7 years of being treated like a burden, 7 years of paying for the privilege of being despised in my own son's house. But I had been paying attention, taking notes, planning for exactly this moment. And now, finally, it was time for them to learn what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. The hotel room was quieter than my son's house had been in years. No television blaring at volumes that hurt my ears because Chloe claimed I was going deaf. No constant stream of complaints about money while she ordered things online that we couldn't afford. No passive-aggressive comments about how much space my few belongings took up in their home. I sat on the edge of the bed, my small suitcase still unopened beside me, and let myself remember how it all began. How I'd gone from being a proud, independent man to someone who got excited about having enough hot water for a decent shower. It started 7 years ago, 3 months after Margaret died. My wife of 38 years, gone in a matter of weeks from a cancer that moved through her body like wildfire. I was still raw from grief, still waking up every morning reaching for her side of the bed, when Ronald showed up at my front door. "Dad, we need to talk," he'd said, and I knew from his tone that this wasn't going to be a conversation about how I was holding up or whether I needed anything. This was business. "The house is too big for you now," he'd continued, standing in my living room like he was conducting an inspection. "And honestly, Dad, you can't afford to maintain it on just your Social Security and pension." He wasn't wrong about the money. Margaret's medical bills had eaten through most of our savings, and the house did feel impossibly empty without her laughter filling the rooms. But when Ronald suggested I sell it and move in with him and Chloe, I should have trusted the knot that formed in my stomach. "Just temporarily," he'd assured me, "until you figure out what you want to do long term." Temporarily. 7 years later, I was still waiting for that temporary arrangement to end. The first few months weren't terrible. Chloe was polite enough, though I could see the strain in her smile whenever I walked into her room. She'd make comments about how cozy everything was now, how they'd have to adjust to having a third person in the house. Little things that made me feel like an intruder rather than family. But it was Ronald's suggestion about contributing to household expenses that should have been my first real warning. "Dad, I know this is awkward, but Chloe and I were talking, and with the extra utilities and food costs, it would really help if you could chip in," he'd said over dinner one night. I'd nodded immediately. Of course I would contribute. I wasn't a freeloader. "How much were you thinking?" "Well, your Social Security is about $1,800 a month, right? And your pension is another $1,000, so maybe $1,500. That would cover most of the extra expenses, $1,500 out of my $2,800 monthly income. It left me with $1,300 for everything else, my medications, clothes, personal items, any emergencies." But I agreed because I wanted to be a good guest, a helpful father-in-law, someone they wouldn't regret helping. That was my first mistake. Within 6 months, helping with expenses became Dad paying for everything. The mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, the cable bill, even their car insurance somehow became my responsibility. Every time I questioned a new expense, Ronald would remind me how much money they were saving me by letting me live there, how much a decent nursing home would cost. "Do you know what Sunset Manor charges?" Chloe would ask whenever I hesitated about paying for something. $3,000 a month, and that's for a shared room. You're getting a steal here, Norman. A steal. That's what she called taking every penny of my income while treating me like hired help. The grocery situation was particularly humiliating. Chloe would make elaborate shopping lists filled with expensive organic foods and specialty items, then hand me the list and expect me to pay for everything. But when it came to actually eating the food, suddenly there were rules. "Norman, that yogurt is for my breakfast smoothies," she'd say if she caught me eating one of the 12 containers I'd just bought. "Didn't you see your name on the generic store brand?" My food was kept on separate shelves marked with little sticky notes so there would be no confusion. Cheaper cuts of meat, day-old bread, generic cereal that tasted like cardboard. Meanwhile, they ate steaks and fresh seafood that I'd purchased with my pension money. The utility bills were another source of constant stress. Every month, they seemed to climb higher and higher. $200 electric bills in the summer because Chloe liked the house Arctic cold. $300 heating bills in the winter because Ronald insisted on keeping the temperature at 75 degrees. When I suggested maybe we could compromise on the thermostat settings, Chloe looked at me like I'd suggested we all start living in caves. "Norman, we're not going to be uncomfortable in our own home," she'd said, emphasizing the word "our" just enough to remind me that this wasn't my home at all. But it was the lottery tickets that really got to me. Every week, without fail, Chloe would buy $20 or $30 worth of scratch-offs and number picks. She'd spread them out on the kitchen table like a dealer laying out cards, scratching each one with the kind of focused intensity most people reserved for important documents. "This is it," she'd announce every time. "I can feel it. This is going to be our big win. Our big win. Using my money to buy tickets for our big win." I'd watch her throw away losing ticket after losing ticket, cursing her bad luck while planning how she'd spend the money she was convinced she'd eventually win. A bigger house, a new car, a vacation to Europe. Never once did she mention that the money she was gambling away was mine. Never once did she consider that maybe, just maybe, I might have my own dreams about what to do with my hard-earned pension. But I kept my mouth shut and kept paying, because where else was I going to go? My house was gone, sold to pay for this arrangement. My friends were scattered to the winds, some dead, others in assisted living facilities that cost more than I could afford. Ronald was my only child, and despite everything, I still loved him. I still hoped that somehow things would get better. They didn't get better, they got worse. By year 3, I wasn't just paying the bills. I was paying for their entertainment, their hobbies, their impulse purchases, Ronald's new golf clubs, Chloe's monthly spa treatments, their weekend getaways to the coast. Every expense was justified as a household necessity or a family investment. When I finally got the courage to ask for an accounting of where my money was going, Chloe laughed in my face. "Accounting? Norman, this isn't a business. This is a family. Families don't keep receipts." But they did keep track of my mistakes. Every dish I left in the sink, every time I used the bathroom at night and forgot to put the seat down, every occasion when I coughed too loud or walked too heavy across their hardwood floors. I was constantly being reminded that I was a guest, a burden, someone who should be grateful for their generosity in allowing me to exist in their space. The worst part wasn't the money, though. The worst part was watching my son disappear behind his wife's cruelty. Ronald had never been the strongest personality, but he'd always been kind. Fair. The man who stood silently by while Chloe tore me apart tonight wasn't the boy I'd raised or the young man I'd been proud to call my son. Somewhere along the way, he'd chosen his wife's approval over his father's dignity, and that hurt worse than all the financial manipulation combined. I opened my suitcase and pulled out the small notebook I'd been keeping for the past 2 years. Page after page of expenses, dates, amounts, patterns, everything they thought I was too old or too stupid to notice. But I'd been watching, learning, planning, because there was something they didn't know about those lottery tickets. Something that was going to change everything. I smiled as I flipped to the last entry in my notebook, dated just 3 days ago. Chloe thought she'd won $57 million, but she hadn't read the fine print carefully enough. She never did. The phone started ringing at 6 in the morning. I let it go to voicemail the first 3 times, enjoying my room service coffee and the complimentary newspaper that nobody had snatched away from me before I could finish reading it. But by the 4th call, I figured it was time to let them sweat a little less. "Hello, Ronald. I said, not bothering to hide the amusement in my voice. Dad, what the hell is going on? His voice was strained, frantic in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager caught sneaking back into the house after curfew. Chloe's been up all night staring at that ticket. She keeps saying your name is on it, but that's impossible, right? You don't even buy lottery tickets. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring both the rich flavor and the panic I could hear building in my son's voice. Is that what she told you? That I don't buy lottery tickets? Well, yeah. I mean, you've always said gambling was a waste of money. You used to lecture me about it when I was in college. I said gambling your future away was stupid. I corrected him. There's a difference between betting money you can't afford to lose and making a calculated investment in possibility. There was a long pause. I could hear Chloe's voice in the background, shrill and demanding, though I couldn't make out the words. Dad, just tell me straight. Is your name really on that ticket? Ronald, son, have I ever lied to you? Another pause, longer this time. No, he admitted quietly. No, you haven't. Then why would I start now? I heard him take a shaky breath. But how? When? Chloe buys the tickets every week. She picks the numbers. She goes to the store. She uses my money. I finished for him. Every week for the past 7 years, your wife has taken my pension check and used part of it to buy lottery tickets. But here's the thing about legal documents, Ronald. The name that matters isn't the name of the person who hands over the cash. It's the name of the person who owns the money being spent. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You put your name on the tickets. Every single one, for the past 2 years, I confirmed. Amazing what you can accomplish when people assume you're too senile to pay attention to details. I heard a crash in the background, followed by Chloe screaming something that would have made a sailor blush. Then Ronald was back on the line, his voice higher pitched now, almost pleading. Dad, this has to be some kind of mistake. Chloe's been buying those tickets for years. She has a system, lucky numbers, the same store every week. You can't just take that away from her. Take what away? I asked, genuinely curious about his logic. The $57 million she won using my money, the jackpot she hit with numbers I've been playing for 24 months while she thought she was in control. But she's the one who picked the numbers. I laughed, a genuine belly laugh that felt better than anything had in years. Ronald, your wife hasn't picked her own numbers in 2 years. She's been playing the same combination I've been feeding her every week. My birthday, your mother's birthday, the date we got married, the day you were born, and the day Margaret died. The silence was deafening. I could picture him standing there in their kitchen, probably still in his pajamas, trying to process the fact that his world had just been turned completely upside down. You've been manipulating her, he said finally, but there was no real conviction in his voice. Manipulating her? I set down my coffee cup a little harder than necessary. Son, let me tell you about manipulation. Manipulation is taking an old man's entire pension and making him feel grateful for the privilege. Manipulation is serving someone smaller portions of food they paid for while complaining about grocery costs. Manipulation is moving someone's chair further from the television every week until they're sitting in the damn kitchen just to watch the news. Dad, manipulation, I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word, is making someone pay for lottery tickets every week while promising them that when you win, you'll take care of them. Then, the minute you think you've hit the jackpot, throwing that same person out on the street like they never mattered at all. I heard Chloe's voice getting closer to the phone, demanding that Ronald let her talk to me. She wants to speak with you, Ronald said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. I'm sure she does. But here's the thing, son. For 7 years, I've been listening to what Chloe wants. I've been paying for what Chloe wants. I've been arranging my entire life around what Chloe wants. Today, for the first time in a very long time, I'm going to do what I want. Which is what? Finish my breakfast. Take a shower in a bathroom where nobody bangs on the door complaining that I'm using too much hot water. Maybe drive down to the lottery office and see about claiming my prize. Your prize, Ronald repeated, and I could hear him testing the words, trying to make them make sense in his new reality. My prize, I confirmed, bought with my money, registered in my name, won fair and square according to every law in this state. Chloe finally wrestled the phone away from him. Her voice came through the speaker like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Norman, you senile old bastard. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but this is theft. Pure and simple theft." "Theft," I mused, settling back against the hotel pillows. "That's an interesting choice of words, Chloe. Tell me, when you used my pension money to buy those tickets every week, what did you call that?" "I called it household expenses. I called it family investments. You were living in our house, eating our food. Food I paid for, in a house where I paid the mortgage." "You were a guest!" she screamed. "Guests don't pay the bills, Chloe. Tenants do, and tenants have rights." I could hear her breathing hard on the other end of the line, probably trying to think of some new angle, some way to turn this back in her favor. It was almost sad, watching someone who'd been so confident in her cruelty suddenly realize she'd been outmaneuvered by the person she'd considered the weakest link in the chain. "The ticket is in my purse," she said finally, her voice taking on a sly tone. "I have possession of it. Without the physical ticket, you can't claim anything." I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "Chloe, sweetheart, you really should read the fine print on those tickets more carefully. The Lottery Commission keeps digital records of every purchase, the name on the account, the credit card used, the time and date of purchase. I've been buying those tickets online for the past 2 years, using my own bank account, having the confirmations sent to my own email address." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd fainted. Finally she spoke, her voice small and desperate. "You can't do this to us. We're family." "Family," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air between us. "You know, Chloe, you're absolutely right. We are family. And after 7 years of learning exactly what that word means to you, I think it's time you learned what it means to me." I hung up the phone and turned it off completely. Then I ordered another pot of coffee and opened the newspaper to the business section. I had some serious financial planning to do. After all, $57 million was a lot of money, but it wasn't nearly enough to buy back 7 years of dignity. For that, I was going to need something much more valuable. I was going to need patience. The lottery office was busier than I'd expected for a Tuesday morning. But then again, most people didn't have 57 million reasons to rearrange their schedule. I sat in the waiting area, my folder of documentation neatly organized on my lap, watching other hopeful winners clutch their tickets like prayer cards. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since I'd turned it back on an hour ago. 17 missed calls from Ronald, 12 from Chloe, and 3 from numbers I didn't recognize. I'd listened to one voicemail from my son, just to gauge how desperate they were getting. "Dad, please, you have to call me back. Chloe's talking about lawyers. She says she has rights to that money, that it was her system, her numbers, her luck. Please don't do anything crazy. We can work this out. We're family." Family. There was that word again. Norman Kellerman, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a professional smile, gestured toward her office. "I'm Sarah Chen, Customer Relations Manager. Congratulations on your win." I followed her into a small, comfortable office where she offered me coffee and began the process of verifying my claim. The paperwork was straightforward, surprisingly so. Bank records showing the online purchases, email confirmations with timestamps, my driver's license matching the name on the account. "This is quite a windfall," Sarah said as she reviewed the documents. 57,400,000 and change. After taxes, you're looking at about 38 million. Have you given any thought to how you'd like to receive the payments?" "Lump sum," I said without hesitation. "At my age, I don't have time to wait around for annual installments." She smiled. "Most winners your age make the same choice. Very practical. Now I do have to ask, have there been any disputes regarding this ticket? Any family members or friends claiming they should share in the winnings?" I thought about that question for a moment, weighing how honest I wanted to be. "Yes," I said finally. "My daughter-in-law seems to believe she has some claim to the money." Sarah's expression became more serious. "Can you tell me the nature of her claim?" She was under the impression that because she physically purchased tickets using my money, she was the rightful owner of any winnings. She's since been informed otherwise, but she's not taking it well. "I see. And you're confident that you're the legal owner of this ticket?" I opened my folder and pulled out a thick stack of bank statements. For the past 2 years, I've been purchasing lottery tickets online using my personal checking account. Every transaction is documented. The winning ticket was purchased on October 15th at 7:43 p.m. using my debit card, charged to my account, with confirmation sent to my email address. Sarah reviewed the papers carefully, cross-referencing them with the lottery's records on her computer. After several minutes, she nodded. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Kellerman. The ticket is legally yours, purchased with your funds from your registered account. If your daughter-in-law wishes to dispute this, she's welcome to consult with an attorney, but I can tell you that the law is very clear about ownership in cases like this. While Sarah prepared the paperwork for my payout, my phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Kellerman? This is Patricia Hendricks from Hendricks Moore and Associates. I'm calling on behalf of Chloe Patterson regarding the lottery ticket in question. I almost laughed. Chloe had actually hired a lawyer. Ms. Hendricks, I'm currently at the lottery office claiming my lawfully won prize. If your client has concerns about the ownership of this ticket, I suggest she review her understanding of property law. Mr. Kellerman, my client maintains that she selected the numbers, purchased the physical ticket, and was the intended beneficiary of any winnings. She's prepared to file an injunction to prevent you from claiming the prize until this matter can be resolved in court. Your client, I said calmly, used my money to purchase tickets in my name from my account. I have 2 years of bank records proving this. What exactly is her legal standing? There was a pause. She claims there was an oral agreement that any winnings would be shared with the household. An oral agreement. I looked over at Sarah, who was clearly listening to my side of the conversation with professional interest. Ms. Hendricks, did your client mention that this alleged oral agreement was made while she was systematically draining my pension and Social Security to pay for her lifestyle? Did she mention that she threw me out of the house the moment she thought she'd won, calling me useless and telling me to go to a nursing home? Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Kellerman, perhaps we could arrange a meeting to discuss a reasonable settlement. Ms. Hendricks, the reasonable settlement is that I keep the money I won with my money using my account. If your client wants to pursue this further, she's welcome to explain to a judge why she believes she deserves $57 million for the privilege of being cruel to an elderly man for 7 years. I hung up and turned back to Sarah, who was trying very hard to maintain her professional composure. Family disputes over lottery winnings are more common than you might think, she said diplomatically. But in cases where the ownership is this clear-cut, they rarely go far in court. 20 minutes later, I walked out of the lottery office with a check for $38,200,000 and the satisfaction of knowing that Chloe's lawyer had probably already advised her to drop any legal challenges. My phone started ringing before I reached my truck. Dad, please, you have to listen to me. Ronald's voice was strained, desperate. Chloe's having some kind of breakdown. She's been crying for hours, talking about suicide, saying her life is over. I felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but it was quickly replaced by memory. Memory of Chloe laughing while she threw me out. Memory of her calling me useless, worthless, a burden she was finally free of. Son, I said quietly, where was your concern for my mental health when she was humiliating me every day for 7 years? That's different, Dad. You're stronger than she is. Am I? Or did you just find it easier to believe that so you wouldn't have to stand up to your wife? The silence stretched between us like a chasm that had been building for years. Finally, Ronald spoke, his voice small and defeated. What do you want from us? It was the first time in 7 years that either of them had asked me what I wanted. Not what I was willing to give, not what I could contribute, not how I could make their lives easier. What I wanted. I want you to understand something, Ronald. For 7 years, I've been paying for the privilege of being treated like garbage in my own son's house. I've watched you stand by while your wife destroyed my dignity piece by piece. I've eaten cheap food while paying for your steaks, lived in a basement while paying your mortgage, and smiled through it all because I thought family was worth more than pride. Dad, I'm not finished. Yesterday, when your wife thought she'd won the lottery, what was the first thing she did? She threw me out. Not, Dad, we won. You'll never have to worry about money again. Not, Dad, let's find you a nice place of your own. She literally told me I had no purpose anymore and to go to a nursing home. I could hear him crying now, quiet sobs that he was trying to muffle. So what do I want, son? I want you to live with the consequences of the choices you've made. I want you to understand what it feels like to be powerless, to be dependent on someone else's goodwill, to have your future decided by people who see you as a burden. Are you saying you're never coming back? That you're cutting us off completely? I thought about that question as I drove through the city I'd lived in for most of my adult life, looking at it with new eyes, seeing possibilities instead of limitations. I'm saying that the old Norman is never coming back, the Norman who paid your bills and took your abuse and smiled while his heart was breaking. That man is gone. What about the new Norman? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. The new Norman is going to be just fine. The question is, what are you and Chloe going to do with yourselves now that your ATM has been permanently closed? 3 weeks after claiming my lottery winnings, I was sitting in the sunroom of my new house, reading the morning paper with my coffee, when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Ronald's car in my driveway. The same beat-up Honda he'd been driving for 5 years because they couldn't afford car payments after I stopped subsidizing their lifestyle. I took my time answering the door. Let him wait. Let him wonder if I was even home, or if I'd seen him and chosen not to answer. 7 years of having my time treated as worthless had taught me to value these small moments of power. When I finally opened the door, Ronald looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 weeks. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unwashed, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting stress. "Hi, Dad," he said quietly, his hands shoved deep in his pockets like a chastened child. "Ronald." I didn't invite him in, didn't step aside to make room, just stood there in my doorway, waiting to see what had brought him to my new address. "Nice place," he said, looking past me into the house. "Really nice. The neighborhood looks expensive." "It should. It cost $2.3 million. He winced. We both knew that was more money than he'd make in his entire lifetime, even before Chloe's spending habits had destroyed their financial stability. "Dad, can we talk? Please?" I considered making him ask twice, making him stand on my porch like a door-to-door salesman, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to know how bad things had gotten, how quickly their house of cards had collapsed once I'd stopped being their foundation. I led him into my living room, a spacious area with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a meticulously landscaped garden. The furniture was new, expensive, comfortable. Everything in my old life had been chosen by committee, subject to Chloe's approval and budget constraints. This house was entirely mine. Ronald sat on the edge of my leather sofa like he was afraid to get too comfortable, his eyes darting around the room, taking inventory of my new life. "How's Chloe?" I asked, settling into my recliner with my coffee. He rubbed his face with both hands. "She's not good, Dad. She hasn't left the house since you claimed the money. She just sits in the kitchen, staring at lottery tickets, trying to figure out how she missed it." "Missed what?" "Your name. On the tickets. She says she bought hundreds of them over the years and never noticed that your name was on them instead of hers." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "And what does she think happened? That I hypnotized the lottery commission into changing their records? She thinks you tricked her somehow. She keeps saying you must have switched the tickets or hacked into the lottery system or, I don't know, Dad. She's not making much sense lately." We sat in silence for a few minutes, Ronald staring at his hands while I watched a pair of cardinals at the bird feeder outside my window. Finally, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're losing the house." I'd been expecting this, but it still hit me with a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because they were finally facing the consequences of their financial irresponsibility. Sadness because my son was going to suffer for his wife's greed and his own weakness. "How long do you have?" I asked. 60 days, maybe less. We haven't made a mortgage payment since you left." Chloe thought. Well, she thought we were rich. She went on a spending spree that first week, bought a new car, booked a cruise, ordered furniture we couldn't afford. By the time the credit card bills came in and reality set in. "How much do you owe?" Ronald pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, unfolding it with shaking hands. "Mortgage is behind by $4,600. Credit cards are maxed out at about $18,000. The new car payment is $600 a month, plus utilities, insurance, groceries." He looked up at me with desperate eyes. "We're drowning, Dad. $23,000, less than what I spent on my new kitchen. A rounding error in my lottery winnings. But to them, it might as well have been $1 million. "What does Chloe want you to ask me?" I said, because we both knew this wasn't Ronald's idea. He flinched like I'd slapped him. She thinks maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement. A loan, maybe. Or if you wanted to buy the house back and let us rent it from you. Let me guess. Below market rate with flexible payment terms and probably some kind of understanding that if times get tough, I'd be flexible about the rent. "Dad, please. I know we screwed up. I know we treated you badly, but we're family." There was that word again. Family. The magic word that was supposed to erase 7 years of humiliation and abuse. Ronald, do you remember what Chloe said to me the day she thought she'd won the lottery? He shifted uncomfortably. She was excited, Dad. People say things when they're excited. She told me I had no purpose anymore. She told me to go to a nursing home. She threw me out of the house like I was garbage. She didn't mean it, didn't she? I leaned forward in my chair. Son, your wife spent 7 years treating me like a wallet with legs. She took every penny of my pension and Social Security, made me pay for groceries I wasn't allowed to eat, bills for a house where I wasn't welcome. And the second she thought she didn't need me anymore, she discarded me without a moment's hesitation. Ronald was crying now, tears streaming down his face. I know we were wrong, but what am I supposed to do? I love her, Dad. I can't just abandon her. The way you abandoned me. The words hung in the air between us like a physical weight. Ronald's shoulders shook with quiet sobs, and for a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be. The child who would run to me when he skinned his knee or had a nightmare. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have stood up to her. I should have protected you. I was weak and selfish, and I let her turn me into someone I hate. It was the first real apology I'd heard from him in 7 years. The first acknowledgement that what had happened to me was wrong, that I had been wronged. Part of me wanted to forgive him right then, to write him a check and pretend the past could be erased with money. But the part of me that had spent 7 years learning to survive, the part that had been forced to become stronger than I ever wanted to be, that part wasn't ready to let him off the hook so easily. What about Chloe? I asked. Has she apologized? Ronald wiped his eyes with his sleeve. She says she's sorry about how things ended. But she still thinks the money should be shared. She says it was a family investment, that we're all responsible for the win. I laughed, a sound devoid of humor. A family investment? Is that what she calls 7 years of financial abuse? Dad, please, just tell me what you want. Tell me what it would take for you to help us. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my garden, my view, my peace. What did I want? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself for 3 weeks. I want Chloe to understand what it feels like to be powerless, I said finally. I want her to know what it's like to depend on someone else's goodwill, to have your future decided by people who see you as a burden. She's learning that now, Ronald said quietly. We both are. Are you? Or are you just here asking me to rescue you again? Ronald was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, older, more tired. What if I left her? I turned around, surprised. What? What if I divorced Chloe? Would that change anything between us? It wasn't a question I'd expected, and it caught me off guard. For 7 years, I'd watched my son choose his wife over his father, over his own moral compass, over basic human decency. The idea that he might finally be ready to make a different choice was both shocking and deeply sad. Ronald, I can't make that decision for you, and I won't bribe you to make it. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking, if I found the courage to do what I should have done years ago, would there be a place for me in your new life? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not the weak man who'd stood by while his wife abused his father, but the boy I'd raised to know right from wrong. Maybe it wasn't too late for him after all. There's always been a place for you in my life, son. But not for the man you became when you chose her cruelty over my dignity. He nodded slowly, understanding flooding his eyes. I need to think about what kind of man I want to be. Yes, I said quietly. You do. After he left, I sat in my sunroom until the sun went down, thinking about choices and consequences, about family and forgiveness. $38 million had bought me freedom from their financial abuse, but it couldn't buy me back the years I'd lost or the trust that had been broken. That would have to be earned, one difficult choice at a time. 6 months later, I was tending to my rose garden when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I didn't look up immediately. One of the unexpected pleasures of my new life was not jumping to attention every time someone wanted something from me. The roses could wait, or they could leave. Either way was fine with me. But when I finally glanced toward the house, I saw Ronald getting out of his car alone. No Chloe, no desperate energy. He moved with a calmness I hadn't seen in him for years, like a man who'd finally stopped running from something that had been chasing him. The garden looks incredible, Dad, he said as he approached, his hands in his pockets but his posture relaxed. Retirement suits me. I replied, deadheading a particularly lovely red bloom. Turns out I'm pretty good at growing things when I'm not too busy paying for other people's lives. Ronald smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. I wanted to tell you in person. The divorce is final. I'd been expecting this news for months, ever since our conversation in my living room. But hearing it still felt significant. How are you holding up? Better than I thought I would, he said honestly. Scared, but better. I found a small apartment across town. It's not much, but it's mine. I'm making the rent payments myself, buying my own groceries, making my own decisions about what to watch on television. I chuckled. Revolutionary concepts. You'd be surprised how good it feels to eat cereal for dinner because you want to, not because someone else controlled the grocery budget. We stood together in comfortable silence, both of us understanding the weight of what he'd just shared. For the first time in over a decade, my son was living his own life. What about Chloe? I asked, not out of concern for her, but because I needed to know if this chapter was truly closed. Ronald's expression darkened slightly. She moved back in with her sister in Florida. Last I heard, she was working at a call center, living in a spare bedroom, still buying lottery tickets with what little money she has left. She calls me sometimes, usually when she's been drinking, telling me I ruined her life by leaving. Any regrets? He considered the question seriously. About leaving her? No. About taking so long to do it, every day. He paused, kicking at a small stone in my garden path. Dad, I know I can't undo 7 years of being a coward. I know I can't take back all the times I should have stood up for you and didn't. But I want you to know that I understand now what kind of man I was, and I'm trying to become someone better. It was the kind of conversation I'd dreamed about having with my son for years, but now that it was happening, I found myself feeling cautious. Trust, once broken, doesn't repair itself with good intentions and pretty words. What does that look like, practically speaking? I asked. It looks like me taking responsibility for my own life, not asking you for money or help or anything else except maybe, eventually, the chance to be your son again. I set down my pruning shears and really looked at him. The desperate, haunted look was gone from his eyes. His clothes were clean but inexpensive. His car was old but well-maintained. He looked like a man who was working within his means, living honestly, making difficult choices with dignity. Have you been to see your mother's grave? I asked suddenly. The question surprised him. Not since the funeral. Why? I go every Sunday. Bring her fresh flowers. Tell her about my week. I think she'd like to hear from you too. Ronald's eyes filled with tears. Do you think? Would it be okay if I came with you sometime? This Sunday, 10 o'clock. It became our routine. Every Sunday morning, Ronald would arrive at my house at 9:45, and we'd drive together to the cemetery. We'd spend an hour at Margaret's grave, talking to her about our weeks, our struggles, our small victories. Then we'd go to lunch at the diner where his mother and I used to eat breakfast every Saturday for 20 years. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was something more complicated than that. It was the slow, careful work of rebuilding a relationship that had been poisoned by years of poor choices and misplaced loyalties. 3 months after our first visit to the cemetery, Ronald brought something with him to lunch that made me stop eating mid-bite. I found this in Mom's jewelry box when I was cleaning out the storage unit, he said, placing a small envelope on the table between us. It's addressed to you, but it looks like she never had the chance to give it to you. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Margaret's careful handwriting, dated just 2 weeks before she died. My dearest Norman, it began. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you're facing life without me. I know how hard that must be, and I wish I could be there to help you through it. But I need you to know something important about our son. Ronald is weak when it comes to standing up to strong personalities. He always has been. Remember how he'd let the neighborhood bullies take his lunch money rather than fight back? He's still that little boy in many ways, choosing the path of least resistance even when he knows it's wrong. But weakness isn't the same as evil, Norman. Ronald has a good heart, even if he doesn't always have the courage to follow it. When the time comes, and he disappoints you, because he will, remember that he's still our son. He's still the boy who used to bring me dandelions and tell me they were the most beautiful flowers in the world. Don't give up on him completely, but don't enable him either. Let him face the consequences of his choices until he learns to make better ones. And when he finally finds the strength to do right, be there for him. I love you both more than words can say. Forever yours, Margaret. I read the letter 3 times before I could speak, my wife's voice so clear in my mind that I could almost feel her presence. She always understood you better than you understood yourself. I said finally, folding the letter carefully and putting it in my wallet. Ronald wiped his eyes with his napkin. She understood us both. Yes, she did. We finished our lunch in comfortable silence, both of us thinking about the woman who had loved us enough to see our flaws clearly and love us anyway. That evening, I called my financial advisor and had him set up a trust fund. Not for Ronald directly, but for his future. Money that would be there when he needed it, but only after he'd proven he could live responsibly on his own. College funds for any grandchildren I might eventually have. A safety net that couldn't be accessed by manipulation or desperation, only by genuine need and demonstrated responsibility. Margaret had been right about Ronald. He was weak, but he wasn't evil, and now, finally, he was learning to be strong. 6 months later, Ronald brought someone to our Sunday cemetery visit, a quiet woman named Sarah who worked as a nurse at the local hospital. She was kind but not naive, strong but not controlling, the kind of woman who would compliment his gentleness without exploiting it. Mom would have liked her, I told Ronald as we watched Sarah place flowers on Margaret's grave. I think so too, he agreed. Sarah doesn't need me to take care of her. She just wants me to be a good man. That's what your mother wanted for you too. As for me, I was learning what it meant to live without the weight of other people's problems on my shoulders. I traveled when I wanted to, ate what I pleased, watched whatever was on television without considering anyone else's preferences. I volunteered at the local literacy center, teaching adults to read, and found more satisfaction in that work than I'd found in anything for years. The lottery money had given me financial freedom, but the real prize was something money couldn't buy. It was the knowledge that I was strong enough to walk away from people who didn't value me, wise enough to see manipulation for what it was, and patient enough to wait for genuine change rather than settling for empty promises. I never heard from Chloe again, except for one letter that arrived about a year after the divorce. It was filled with self-pity and blame, accusing me of destroying her marriage and ruining her life. I read it once, then threw it away without responding. Some people never learn, and that wasn't my problem anymore. On the 2-year anniversary of winning the lottery, I was sitting in my garden at sunset, reading the newspaper and sipping a glass of wine, when Ronald called. "Dad, I have news," he said, his voice bright with excitement. "Sarah and I are engaged, and we're pregnant." I felt a joy so pure and unexpected that it took my breath away. A grandchild. A chance to do better, to be the kind of grandfather who was present without being controlling, supportive without being enabling. "Congratulations, son. Your mother would be over the moon. We want to name her Margaret, if it's a girl." After Mom, I had to put down the phone for a moment to compose myself. When I picked it back up, Ronald was still there, waiting patiently. "She would have loved that," I managed to say. "We were hoping. Would you consider being our child's primary babysitter? Not for money, just because. Well, because every kid deserves a grandfather who loves them." I looked around my beautiful garden, my peaceful house, my carefully constructed solitary life, and realized that some kinds of responsibility were privileges, not burdens. "I'd be honored," I said, and for the first time in years, I felt like the luckiest man alive.